Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a time when the world breathes a little slower, the fire crackles low in the hearth, and the forest outside your village hums with the possibility of things unseen. The year, let's say somewhere in the 1300s. You're wearing itchy wool. Your dinner was mostly turnip paste. And if someone offers you a charm to stop your cow from getting sick, you take it. Because tonight, we're exploring how deeply people in the medieval world believed in magic. Spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't survive this century without a charm, a saint, or a slightly suspect potion. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The trees loom tall as you trudge home through the misty woods. There's no moon tonight, which, as everyone in your village agrees, means the night spirits are more active. You clench a small pouch of herbs and salt tied at your belt. Nothing fancy, just a charm your aunt gave you after you spilled milk 3 mornings in a row. You didn't ask what it's for, and she didn't say. That's how magic works here. Quietly, pervasively, and often without footnotes. In your world, magic isn't some flashy spellbook or a wizard with a dramatic beard. It's woven into the rhythms of life, embedded in rituals, recipes, and warnings whispered to you since birth. You cross yourself when passing an old oak. You mutter a charm when your candle flickers. You know not to look too long at the cat that stares at you like it knows your secrets. Historians still argue whether magic in the Middle Ages was a genuine belief or a complex social tool. But from your worn leather shoes on the muddy road to the shrine tucked into the forest hollow, the line between belief and practicality blurs. If something works, even just once, it's remembered. If it fails, well, maybe you needed a different charm. And so, your little village runs on a delicate blend of religion, tradition, and just enough fear to keep things interesting. You might attend Mass in the morning, burn rosemary in the evening, and hear stories by nightfall of the old man who walked too far into the hills and came back speaking a different language. You smile nervously at that one. He's your neighbor. The air smells like damp earth and chimney smoke. You pass your neighbor's home and see a line of garlic hanging above the doorframe. Not for cooking, obviously. It's for protection. Though from what exactly, no one dares say. Maybe sickness, maybe spirits, maybe just the creeping dread that this winter might be worse than the last. Your home isn't far now. A low hut with rushes for a roof and a door that creaks like it's sharing a secret. You pause before entering, not because of superstition, but out of habit. You knock twice, then once more, in that odd rhythm your mother taught you when you were young. To warn the things inside you're coming in peace, she used to say with a wink. You're not sure if she was joking. You're not sure she knew either. Inside, it's warm. Your fire flickers low, its orange light casting long shadows. There's a carved figure on the mantel, a saint or a forest spirit, depending on who you ask. Either way, you nod to it, just in case. You settle onto your straw mat and wrap yourself in a coarse wool blanket that smells faintly of sheep. Outside, an owl hoots once, then again. You try not to think about how some say owls are messengers for witches, and definitely don't count the hoots aloud. you think of the tale the blacksmith told today about the man whose shadow walked away from him one morning and didn't return. He withered within a week, they say, and no amount of prayers or potions helped. Just a story, of course, but then again, the blacksmith swears he saw the shadow walking through the fog. And here's the strange thing. None of this feels especially strange. It's simply the world you live in, one where unseen forces shape the known, where bad luck is rarely random, and even your grumpiest neighbor might be secretly wearing a charm in his boot to keep his teeth from falling out. The scholars in faraway cities might scoff. They write treatises on the natural world, on logic and divine order, but they also sleep with blessed relics under their pillows and burn certain herbs on the wrong kind of Tuesday. They know deep down that a little superstition never hurts. Magic in your time isn't always dramatic. More often, it's subtle. A nudge here, a symbol there. A child's birth marked by a double rainbow might mean greatness or doom. A mole shaped like a star? Best keep that hidden. That old woman who talks to her goats? Everyone's polite, but no one accepts her bread. And just like that, you realize that believing in magic isn't about casting spells. It's about living in a world where you don't control much. But maybe, just maybe, you can tip the scales a little. With the right word, or herb, or gesture, you might win back a little safety. Or at least feel like you have. You lie back and let the sounds of the village settle into your chest. A distant dog bark, the rhythmic creak of someone chopping wood. The wind brushing through the eaves like an unseen hand turning pages. Tomorrow, someone will share another tale, another warning, another charm to try. And you'll listen? Of course you will. Because in the medieval world, believing in magic might not be required. But it's definitely recommended. You wake before dawn, like most days. Not because an alarm rang, but because the rooster, 5 doors down, screamed like it was announcing the apocalypse. The sky is still smeared with indigo, and your breath hangs in little clouds as you shuffle across the cold floor to stoke the fire. You mutter a small verse. Not a prayer, exactly. More like a habit. Something your grandmother said helped the flame catch faster. It's market day. You pull on layers of coarse linen and a wool hood, tucking a tiny token into your sleeve. A small knot of red string and lavender sprigs. It's for protection, yes, but also for better prices. Your cousin swears it worked when she wore it to barter for eggs. That was 2 months ago. You haven't taken it off since. As you step outside, the village is already stirring. Smoke curls from chimneys. A goat bleats in a way that feels vaguely accusatory. And there, just past the well, the midwife is chalking something on the door of her hut. You pretend not to look too closely, though your brain can't help noting. It's a charm against envy, or fertility, or foot rot. Honestly, with midwives, you never really know. The road to market is muddy, of course. Your boots squelch with each step, and the smell of livestock grows stronger the closer you get. But this isn't just a place to buy bread and sell turnips. This is the heartbeat of magical exchange. Charms, tokens, powders in tiny paper cones. It's all here, just beneath the onions and eels. And then, there's that one cheese vendor. You see her near the edge of the stalls, wrapped in a green shawl that definitely didn't come from around here. She has one milky eye and an impressive collection of small jars. No one talks about her directly, but everyone seems to pass her stall at least once by accident. She never advertises. She just waits. If your cow won't give milk, she might have something. If your neighbor's new wife is too beautiful, too lucky, too mysteriously fertile, you might stop by to buy goat balm and ask quietly whether she has anything for balance. And she always does. A pinch of dried roots, a powder that smells faintly of pepper and regret. No labels, no refunds. Historians still argue whether these market vendors were genuinely seen as witches or just tolerated herbalists with good business sense. The lines are blurry, but here, in your boots and cloak, passing by bundles of rosemary tied with string and chickens that look like they know secrets, they're not blurry at all. They're very, very real. A few stalls down, an old man is selling iron nails. You overhear him claim they've been blessed by a monk in Normandy. They're supposed to stop ghosts from walking through your walls. You're not sure if that's true, but his hands shake in that dramatic way that always means extra convincing. You buy one. It's only a few coppers, and honestly, your walls have been creaking more than usual. Nearby, a group gathers around a woman chanting softly as she sprinkles water on a child's blanket. For peaceful sleep, she says. The parents nod solemnly. You resist the urge to ask if she sells adult-sized versions. Instead, you trade 3 onions for a small satchel of quiet dreams and keep moving. The whole square hums with this undercurrent of belief. Officially, the church disapproves of magic. Unofficially, well, let's just say Father Bernard's sister sells holy thistles wrapped in cloth near the bakery. They're not magical, of course, just comforting. You pause by a potter's stall where small clay amulets hang like wind chimes. Each is etched with a symbol. Some you recognize, some you definitely don't. One looks suspiciously like a snail eating a cross. You don't ask. Instead, you buy a little token shaped like a hand. For good luck, the potter says with a shrug. Or to slap misfortune, depending who you ask. The sun rises higher, and so does the noise. A woman cries out about stolen bread. 2 boys start throwing fish at each other, and somewhere, someone is playing a flute that sounds just slightly off. Still, amid the chaos, a familiar rhythm holds everything together. Rituals, signs, and tiny assurances passed hand to hand. You think about your own little collection at home. Dried mint hanging from the rafters. A carved spoon buried under the threshold. The rosemary bush your aunt insists you never trim after dusk. It's all part of life, as expected as morning fog or burnt porridge. You remember when your cousin tried to stop believing in charms for exactly 1 week. 7 days later, his cartwheel broke, his hen stopped laying, and he caught an odd rash that resembled the face of the local priest. He's been wearing a foot crystal ever since. Historians note that many of these customs weren't seen as magic by their practitioners, but simply as inherited wisdom. You don't call it casting a spell. You call it doing what Gran did. You finish your rounds at the market with a modest sack of goods, and more than a few odds and ends that might technically count as magical. A charm for better dreams. A stone that supposedly wards off jealousy. And a tiny bundle of feathers and thread you bought mostly because the seller said it sings to good news. You're not sure what that means, but you like the way she smiled when she said it. And so, as you head home, your pack a little heavier and your wallet a little lighter. You feel, oddly, a bit steadier. The sky has cleared, the path is firm beneath your feet, and even the wind seems to hum in agreement. Maybe the cheese vendor's powder is nonsense. Maybe it's not. But in a world where plagues arrive unannounced and storms flatten entire harvests, believing in a little magic is just another way to keep walking forward. And besides, you really don't trust that cat. The morning after market day, you wake up with a small itch in your throat and a larger one in your brain. You dreamt of goats reciting poetry, which probably means you inhaled too much of that quiet dreams powder. As you roll out of bed, you glance at the corner shelf where your grandmother's herb jar sits. It's got everything you might need for today's problem. Dried fennel, sage, a shard of quartz, and what might be the husk of a beetle. It's hard to tell. She labeled it for mornings that feel sideways. This is medicine, medieval style. Your village has a healer, two, actually. One is a thin old woman with precisely 3 teeth, a constant scowl, and a collection of remedies she mutters about in Latin-inflected gibberish. The other is a traveling monk who visits twice a month, carries a book full of saints and salves, and believes bleeding solves most things. Between the two of them, no one's quite sure who's more dangerous. You, like many others, hedge your bets. A little church prayer, a little willow bark tea, a little whispered phrase while tying a knot into a length of flax. This is what medicine looks like here. Equal parts hope, habit, and timing the moon correctly. Ah yes, the moon. You've probably noticed by now that people keep glancing upward before doing anything remotely medical. That's not superstition. It's common sense. Everyone knows you shouldn't pull a tooth during a waxing moon, or bathe an infant under a waning one. And don't even think about treating warts on the new moon unless you want them to multiply. Historians still argue whether these beliefs stemmed from ancient astrological systems or were simply reinforced by generations of coincidence and confirmation bias. But from where you're sitting, sipping a brew that smells like hay and onions, the moon has as much say in your health as any doctor. You remember last winter when the village reeve caught a terrible cough. The healer bled him twice, and the monk gave him a relic to sleep beside. Meanwhile, his wife hid a toad in his pillowcase and burned 3 pine cones in the fireplace. No one knows which remedy worked, but he got better, and now every house keeps a pine cone in a clay bowl by the hearth. Just in case, you step outside to gather herbs, because nothing cures a scratchy throat like doing your own foraging. The garden smells of damp soil and yesterday's ash. You bend to pick horehound, which tastes terrible but is said to soothe lungs and bad moods. Your neighbor spots you and offers a tip. If you pick the leaves while holding your breath, they're more potent. You nod, trying not to look skeptical, and then catch yourself actually doing it. That's the thing. Most of the time, you don't think about the magic. You just follow the steps. Boil water, add plant, whisper charm, drink slowly. It doesn't feel strange. It feels necessary. You pass the well and spot a bundle of herbs tied to the rope. Someone's blessing their water again. You pause to sniff rosemary and nettle, probably to ward off fever spirits. You don't scoff. Not because you believe fever spirits are real, except on Tuesdays maybe, but because the last time someone mocked a water charm, the well frog died, and no one slept right for weeks. Historians point out that many medieval cures were remarkably effective for the time. Willow bark truly reduces fever. Mint soothes the stomach. Honey disinfects. But it was really just the herb that mattered. The ritual counted. The words, the hand gestures, The wax-sealed pouch hung over your bedpost. That's where the magic lived, in the details. And there were stranger remedies. You once saw a woman apply mouse fat behind her ears to draw out wicked thoughts. Another swore by a paste of crushed ants and ash to cure jealousy. Externally applied, thank goodness. Your aunt used to chase away headaches by wrapping her head in a red cloth and humming while staring into a bowl of still water. You tried it once. The headache stayed, but your humming improved. Scholars debate whether people genuinely believed in these medical magical treatments, or if they simply followed them because not doing so was scarier. You don't pretend to know the answer, but you do know that the local miller once ignored a wart charm and later dropped a flour sack on his foot. Coincidence? Maybe. But his new wart charm is the size of a handkerchief and stitched with actual prayers. Back home, you crush your horehound into a thick brown mash and mix it with honey and a pinch of salt. You whisper something your grandmother used to say, something about strength and stubborn herbs, and then sip. It's terrible, but afterward your throat feels calmer. Or maybe it's just the honey. Doesn't matter. The ritual worked. You feel better. Even the church, with all its sermons against pagan practices, knew where to draw the line. The local priest once carried dried angelica root, just for the smell, but everyone knew he rubbed it on his boots before sermons. For divine confidence, he said. Uh-huh. And so, you clean your bowl, tie a knot in the flax string, and hang it above the door. The wind outside rustles through the leaves, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke and old time. Somewhere in the village, a child cries, a dog barks, and a goat sneezes with great drama. You lie back down, the room still faintly glowing from the hearth, and consider the world around you. One where healing is as much about faith as it is about fungus, where illness might be caused by a draft, or a curse, or that chicken you offended last Tuesday, where medicine walks hand in hand with magic, and the line between them is just another breath in the cold morning air. Mid-morning rolls in with the slow clang of the church bell, and you, still sniffling slightly from yesterday's herbal experiment, shuffle toward the chapel. It's not just for prayer, though you'll mumble the right words when needed. It's also where the village news circulates, where the gossip is cloaked in requests for intercession, and most crucially, where the boundary between divine grace and magical fear becomes deliciously murky. The chapel sits at the heart of the village, a squat stone structure with moss growing in all the right places. Inside, the air smells like beeswax and old wood. Sunlight filters through a warped stained glass window, painting the floor with distorted saints and oddly long feet. Father Bernard stands by the altar, adjusting his robes and trying very hard not to look superstitious. But you've seen him tuck a charm into his sleeve on stormy nights. And that one time, he refused to ring the bell during a solar eclipse. Classic magical logic. The church officially condemns witchcraft, sorcery, and invocations of spirits, not of the Lord. But in practice, the average priest walks a tightrope, especially when his parishioners beg for protection from demons, enchanted cows, and that one guy whose breath causes hiccups. Scholars still argue whether this blend of doctrine and folklore was deliberate tolerance or just inevitable compromise. You slide into a pew next to Marjorie, who nods solemnly and hands you a sprig of vervain. For focus, she whispers. You accept it because rejecting an unsolicited blessing before Mass is the medieval version of walking under a ladder while breaking a mirror and opening an umbrella indoors. Father Bernard begins his sermon. He talks about sin, redemption, and surprisingly, the snares of invisible enemies. You know what he means. Everyone does. Demons mostly. Though some argue he's also referring to heretics, fleas, and the tax collector. You're not sure which is more dangerous, and demons are very real in your world. Not because you've seen one, but because the symptoms are everywhere. Sudden illness, possession, odd behavior, enchantment, unusual strength. Definitely a demon. Last year, when old Hugh lifted a cart off his nephew during a barn collapse, no one praised him. They called for a fast day, just in case the strength came from the wrong source. Your eyes drift to the alcove where the statue of Saint Michael stands, sword raised, trampling something suspiciously reptilian. He's your go-to saint for demonic interference. You've heard stories of him appearing in dreams, battling unseen forces, and helping a woman from the next village find her missing goat. That last one might have been metaphorical. Or not. Mid-sermon, you catch sight of the church cat, named Lucifer, ironically, staring at you from the rafters. Cats get a lot of mixed reviews. Some say they're familiars, spies of witches. Others think they eat demons alongside mice. You decide not to stare too long. After Mass, there's a queue at the holy water font. People dip fingers, mutter blessings, and some even anoint cloths to bring home. You overhear someone ask Father Bernard about bad dreams and invisible teeth. He nods gravely and recommends 3 Hail Marys and a spoonful of fennel soaked in wine. You file that one away. You linger by the altar, where a side table holds wax figures, small, lumpy, and unsettling. They're votive offerings. If you're sick, you leave a wax leg. If your friend is acting strange, maybe a wax head. No one's entirely clear if these are prayers or magical petitions. But they stay on the table until they melt or get stolen by children, whichever comes first. You remember your cousin once left a wax tongue. No explanation. Just placed it there with a serious look. A week later, her husband stopped snoring. Coincidence? Maybe. She never said a word. Back outside, the sky is brighter now, and the village hums with post-sermon energy. Someone is chalking protective runes on a fence. Another is sweeping her threshold while muttering about devils in the floorboards. You wave politely to the baker, who wears a relic in a pouch around his neck. A tooth, supposedly from Saint Cuthbert, though it's suspiciously molar-like. He claims it keeps his dough from rising unevenly. That's the funny thing. Most people don't see this as contradiction. They pray to saints, attend Mass, and wear charms to prevent hexes. It's not about logic. It's about coverage. Why choose one protection when you can triple layer? Historians note how the church gradually tried to suppress folk magic, especially in the later Middle Ages. But early on, the lines remained negotiable. The devil was real, of course, but so were angels, and saints could work miracles that looked suspiciously like spells. If you squinted, you passed the blacksmith who's hanging a rowan branch above his forge. For safety, he grunts. And the fumes. You nod. Whether he's protecting against fire spirits or just covering the smell of goat hair burning, it doesn't matter. He believes. That's the point. And so do you. Because in a world filled with uncertainty, the church might offer salvation. But it's magic that helps you sleep at night. It's the blessing on your doorframe, the whispered chant when your baby won't stop crying, and the odd lump of wax shaped vaguely like a kidney sitting quietly on a church shelf. You walk home slowly, the vervain still in your hand, the scent oddly calming. Maybe it helps, maybe it doesn't, but you breathe easier, your cough has faded, and you haven't tripped once on the cobbled path. That, in your book, counts as a miracle. You arrive home to the rhythmic thud of someone's laundry paddle echoing across the village. A rooster struts by like he owns the place, which he probably does. And inside your hut, the fire has burned down to gentle embers. You toss on a few splinters of wood and wrap your cloak tighter. Time to deal with something far more complicated than demons or coughs. Relationships. You sit down by the hearth, holding a small carved spoon. Not for eating. This one's ceremonial. It belonged to your grandmother, who swore it helped her win over your grandfather by stirring birch bark into goat's milk at the exact moment Venus crossed the horizon. Whether it worked or he was just short on options, you'll never know. Love in the medieval world isn't candlelit poetry and serenades under windows. It's alliances, chores, proximity, and, when necessary, a little magical persuasion. Not curses, nothing cruel, just gentle nudges, a knot in a ribbon, a charm whispered into a loaf of bread, the occasional use of eggs with suggestive placement. This is where home magic shines brightest. In your village, the most popular item in circulation, aside from turnips, is the love charm. These come in many forms. A poultice of violet petals tucked under a pillow. A strand of hair braided with rosemary. One infamous method involves goose grease, a nail, and 3 laps around the millstone at sunrise. No one talks about that one openly, but you notice who avoids the milliard on Wednesdays. Historians still debate whether these practices stem from older pagan traditions, or if they were born from boredom and desperation. Maybe both. But here, love is as much ritual as romance. You glance at the bundle hanging from your neighbor's rafters, a mix of marjoram, salt, and bits of ribbon. Supposedly wards off jealousy and keeps wandering eyes from wandering too far. He claims it's for good dreams, but everyone knows his wife placed it there after he complimented the potter's daughter one too many times. Even animals aren't immune to household enchantment. Farmers often bury protective talismans near the barn entrance or tie small bells with colored string to a cow's horn to encourage milking. You once saw a woman give her chickens a motivational speech while waving a stalk of wheat over their heads. They laid 5 eggs the next day. Coincidence? You're not ready to commit either way. You open your own little drawer of domestic enhancers. Inside, dried petals, 2 carved wooden hearts, 1 cracked, oops, and a lump of wax shaped like, well, you're not sure what it was meant to be, but it smells like cloves and hope. You light a candle and set the heart beside it. Just a little gesture. Nothing dramatic. Maybe it strengthens affection. Maybe it just makes the room smell better. Across the hearth, you hear a faint knocking. 3 short raps on the door. It's your cousin, looking slightly flushed and carrying what can only be described as a suspicious pie. "For good luck," she says, placing it down. It smells delicious. Also, there's a single bay leaf carefully pressed into the crust in the shape of a star. Not a recipe choice. Food magic is particularly powerful in the home. Love charms baked into bread. Protective herbs stirred into soup. You once heard of a stew made to prevent arguments, though no one could remember the ingredients, possibly because whoever ate it became too agreeable to complain. Even your tea feels like a ritual, a pinch of mint, a whisper of intention, a slow stir clockwise. Historians point out that this domestic magic wasn't just superstition, it was control. In a world where women often had little formal power, a well-placed charm or whispered verse was a form of influence. And even men kept their own talismans to ensure strong sons, good harvests, and the occasional boost in marital enthusiasm. Of course, things occasionally went too far. You recall the scandal from 2 summers ago when a young couple eloped after drinking blessed cider. Turned out the cider had been infused with a potion intended to improve singing. It did not improve judgment. They returned 3 days later, red-faced and still off-key. The priest banned cider blessings after that, at least publicly. The church kept a wary eye on household magic. Anything that veered too close to manipulating another's will risked being labeled witchcraft. But enforcement was inconsistent, and most priests looked the other way, especially when the charm worked in their favor. You once caught Father Bernard carrying 3 rosemary sprigs and a lace ribbon. When asked, he said it was for floral arrangement. It smelled like protection from romantic calamity. You finish your tea and nibble cautiously at the suspicious pie. It tastes fine, though the crust has an undertone of intent. Across the room, the candle flickers and the carved heart slumps slightly. You choose not to interpret that. Outside, the sun dips low, casting long shadows over the dirt path and hedgerows. Birds sing their last notes of the day, and somewhere, someone is chanting softly. Maybe a bedtime charm, maybe a very repetitive lullaby. Both work. You stoke the fire once more, wrapping yourself in the familiar smells of home, wood smoke, herbs, and maybe a trace of that wax heart slowly softening in the heat. You don't need to believe in magic to feel its comfort. It's in the quiet rituals, the small gestures, the careful way you fold a blanket or hang dried sage in the window. Because whether it's keeping your cow happy, your partner close, or your dreams gentle, a little household magic never hurts. And if it doesn't work, well, at least you still have pie. You wake in the middle of the night, heart beating a little too fast, the room too quiet. Your breath catches for a moment as your eyes dart across the shadows cast by the dying fire. Everything is still. The roof creaks, something scampers across the floor. Hopefully a mouse, not an omen. You reach instinctively toward the charm hanging by your bedside. The one made of lavender, juniper berries, and a scrap of wool tied into a knot. You don't remember where you got it, but you remember why it's there. You had a dream, not just any dream. One of those dreams, the kind that feels too real, too pointed. A figure with no face, a candle that won't light, someone whispering your name from behind a door you've never seen. You sit up, shivering slightly despite the warmth. Dreams mean things here, and not always good things. In the medieval world, dreams are never just dreams. They are messages, warnings, signs of sin, or possibly demonic interference. Especially if you dream of teeth falling out, flying, or waking up in a tavern with fish in your pockets. That last one actually happened to your cousin. But still, the lines between the spiritual and the magical blur most at night. Sleep, after all, is when your defenses are down. The soul, people believe, may wander. Spirits may enter. And if you're not careful, a demon or something worse might slip in through your dreams and leave you changed. You've heard stories. Everyone has. The boy who dreamed of fire and woke up speaking Latin. The widow whose dreams became real, unfortunately. And of course, the traveling bard who refused to sleep indoors because his nightmares kept turning into thunderstorms. Historians still debate whether these stories are remnants of pagan beliefs, early psychology, or social cautionary tales. But you live in a place where someone's night terrors are your next day weather report. You pull the blanket tighter, glancing toward the window where a faint breeze nudges the shutters. Somewhere beyond the trees, a fox barks, sharp, short, and eerie in the darkness. You cross yourself, then touch your charm again. Not because you believe it will stop anything, necessarily, but because doing nothing feels worse. And then, there's the question of possession. You try not to think about it, but how can you not? The tales are everywhere. A girl who started growling at church. A man who claimed a crow spoke through him. Most of the time, it's chalked up to illness or melancholy of the humors. But sometimes it's a darker conclusion. You remember the merchant who wandered through your village last year. He carried relics, bone splinters, dried saint petals, a vial of blessed wind. He told you about a boy in another village who began muttering in tongues and levitating slightly off the ground. A trick of the eyes, he said with a wink. Or else he was really into choir practice. You're not sure what to make of it, but you do know this. When someone starts acting strange in your village, people act quickly. They call the priest. They burn rosemary. They open every window, even in winter, and dust the sills with ash. And if it gets worse, well, you remember the goat. No one talks about the goat. But it went stiff one morning. Its eyes rolled back, and the baker swore it had been cursed by a woman who envied its fine beard. The priest was called. The goat was prayed over, washed with spring water, and eventually donated to a monastery. It never bleated again. Nor did the baker grow another beard, but that's probably unrelated. Back in bed, you lie still and try to will your thoughts into softer shapes. You hum a lullaby, the one your mother sang when you were ill. Something about a fox in a bonnet and a mouse who danced. Somehow, that always helped. You think of the village healer again. She says certain dreams come when the air is too thin between worlds. That's why people sleep with iron under the bed, or salt lines across the threshold. You tried both last autumn. You tripped over the salt and stubbed your toe on the iron, but you slept well. Mostly. Scholars often note how dream interpretation books from the Middle Ages are filled with contradictions. Dream of climbing a ladder could mean success or death, or both, depending on the color of the rungs and whether or not a rooster was present. No one agrees. But the books still get read, because no one wants to ignore a warning that might save them from invisible tooth demons. You wonder what your dream means. The candle, the door, the name, whispered like a draft through the keyhole. You decide you'll mention it to Marjorie. She's good with symbols. Last week, she interpreted a dream about potatoes as a sign of coming wealth. There are no potatoes in your region, but the man found a silver coin the next day under his rug. You let your breathing slow. Outside, the wind has quieted. The shadows settle. Even the fire gives one last pop before sighing into coals. You're not possessed. You're not cursed. Probably. But just in case, you turn your pillow clockwise 3 times. A trick you heard wards off wandering spirits, and whisper a few words. Nonsense syllables, maybe, or ancient ones. You're not sure. You close your eyes, feeling the soft weight of the charm at your side, the warmth of the blanket, and the fading echo of the fox's bark in the darkened woods. And you dream again. This time, the candle lights. By morning, the dream has mostly slipped away. Only a flicker of candlelight and a faint feeling of being watched remain. You shrug it off. There's bread to bake and a loose chicken to chase, both of which require more urgency than interpreting cryptic dreams, but still, as you sweep the floor, your mind wanders to the little things you do without thinking. Stepping over the threshold with your right foot, knocking twice on wood before opening a closed door, whispering, "Stay safe" to your broom when it falls over. Because in your world, magic isn't always grand. Often, it's quiet, hidden, beneath your feet, between the hedgerows, and deep in the woods, especially the woods. The forest, after all, is not just a bunch of trees. It's a map of warnings, memories, and whispers. Everyone knows you don't sing near fairy rings, those eerie, perfect circles of mushrooms that seem to appear overnight. You don't pick from them, you don't touch them, and you definitely don't sleep in the middle of one. Unless you want to wake up with your name spelled backward and all your hair missing. Your aunt once did that. Not the singing part, but she poked one with a stick. A week later, she couldn't stop hiccuping during Mass. Coincidence? Maybe, but she leaves them alone now. As you head toward the edge of the woods to collect firewood, you carry a sprig of St. John's wort. Not for the scent, it smells like old socks dipped in chamomile, but for protection. Everyone agrees it's good against fae, spirits, and your own wandering thoughts. Historians still argue whether belief in fairies was literal or metaphorical. Stand-ins for illness, the unknown, or even social anxiety. But when the forest is whispering your name and the wind seems to walk ahead of you, you're not interested in metaphors. You remember a tale told around last winter's fire. A man who followed a strange light into the forest and returned 3 days later, convinced only 15 minutes had passed. He also refused to eat bread afterward and kept humming tunes no one recognized. Fairy touched, people said. He now works in the mill and whistles constantly. It's unsettling. The forest has rules. You know them well. Don't follow singing voices. Don't accept food from strangers, even if they look like your cousin. And never, ever thank a gift left on your doorstep. That invites further contact. And honestly, your pantry can only handle so much enchanted produce. This morning, you spot a patch of mushrooms clustered in an unsettlingly perfect ring just past the blackberry bush. You freeze. They weren't there yesterday. You mutter a soft apology and take 3 deliberate steps backward, eyes averted. A bird flaps overhead, maybe a crow, maybe something else. Either way, you hurry your pace and cut your firewood farther up the path. You're not the only one, cautious around nature. Most people in the village avoid certain spots. The crooked tree that bleeds sap too red, the hollow stone that hums when touched, the place near the stream where grass refuses to grow. These are thin places, borders. You respect them, or else. And then there are the stories of changelings. You've heard them whispered over stews and behind closed shutters. A baby that suddenly stops crying and stares too intelligently. A child who begins talking backward or shows an unnatural interest in mushrooms. The usual solution: leave the child out overnight and demand the fae return the real one. You grimace. Not all folklore is gentle, but then again, so much of it is less about belief and more about behavior. Don't wander off. Don't be greedy. Don't ignore the goose that honks 3 times without moving. These stories shape your actions and, in their own way, keep you safe. You return home with an armful of wood and slightly damp socks. You light the fire, whisper a thank you to the flame, and place a pebble from the forest under your windowsill, just to confuse anything that might be watching. Pebbles, according to village wisdom, break eye contact with mischievous spirits. You're not sure how, but you've never been stared at through your window, so maybe it works. That evening, Marjorie visits, carrying a small charm made of pine resin and twine. To keep out unwanted visitors, she says, pressing it into your hand. You ask if she means people or other things. She just shrugs. Whatever's worst. As you hang it over the door, you feel a small flicker of reassurance. Not because it's proven, not because it's guaranteed, but because someone cared enough to offer you protection, and because the world feels just a little more understandable when you have your symbols, your stories, and your rules. Scholars have pointed out how these folk beliefs often reflect the need for agency in a world ruled by mystery. When crops fail, when illness strikes, when a storm arrives too soon, blaming fairies is oddly comforting. You can't bargain with weather, but you can leave a saucer of milk out for something that might be listening. As night falls, you pull the shutters closed and tuck a sprig of rue behind the door. Not because you're afraid, just cautious. And maybe, as you drift off, you'll dream of the forest again. But this time, the fairy ring will stay in the distance, and the shadows will keep their names to themselves. The next morning, the village buzzes with a rare energy. Word travels fast, even faster than the geese, which, let's be honest, are both loud and judgmental. Someone's been accused of dabbling. No, not the kind of dabbling that ruins stew or leads to questionable fashion choices. This is magical dabbling, and not the cozy lavender sachet under your pillow kind either. Apparently, the cooper's wife was caught burying a clay figure behind the baker's oven. And now, the baker claims his sourdough has lost its soul. His words, not yours. Now, you've seen a lot of odd behavior in your village. The woman who talks to onions, the shepherd who insists his sheep respond to Latin. But a buried clay figure, that's bold. That's close to the line. And once people think you've crossed the line, whether or not you actually did, it's time to get nervous. Because this is when the local justice system kicks in. And by justice, of course, we mean the very medieval mix of superstition, rumor, and someone who once read part of the book of Leviticus by candlelight. It's trial time, sort of. See, your village doesn't have a full-time judge or magical inquisition squad. What it does have is the reeve, a man with a whistle, a ledger, and the moral flexibility of slightly overcooked pasta. He shows up by midday with Father Bernard and the blacksmith, who doubles as an enforcer when needed, mostly because he's very good at looking disapproving while sharpening metal. They gather in the churchyard, under the old elm tree that everyone pretends isn't cursed. A crowd forms, not too close, just near enough to hear every whispered accusation and gasp appropriately. The cooper's wife stands still, her hands clenched around her apron. She insists the clay figure was meant to absorb bad luck, not transfer it. The baker gestures wildly, flour dusting the air like divine punctuation. and accuses her of souring his starter with malicious intent. You watch from the side, nibbling on a hunk of bread that definitely has some personality left. You chew slowly, watching the drama unfold. A bit of theater, a bit of threat, and a lot of people pretending they've never once buried a weird object in a neighbor's shrubbery. Historians still argue whether local magical accusations were genuine concerns or thinly veiled personal feuds. In practice, it's both. Jealousy, suspicion, a bad harvest, anything can tip the scales. And once the words, "she bewitched me," leave someone's mouth, it's very hard to walk them back. The reeve clears his throat and asks if anyone else has noticed unusual behavior from the accused. This, of course, is an invitation for every petty memory to bloom. Someone says her cat stared at them too long. Another claims their apples went soft after she walked past. A third swears she once sneezed and made the wind change direction. You resist the urge to roll your eyes. Just barely. Eventually the crowd settles, and the reeve makes his decision. She must walk to the river, carry a bucket filled with stones, and recite 3 prayers. If she drops the bucket or stumbles, it might suggest guilt. If not, well, maybe it was just bad clay placement. She completes the task, knees shaking, prayers breathy. She keeps her balance. The crowd murmurs, not quite satisfied, but unwilling to escalate. The baker snorts, but agrees to let the matter rest, though you're pretty sure his bread will be extra salty this week. Back at your home, you think about how thin the line is between folk practice and dangerous suspicion. Everyone uses charms. Everyone mutters over tea, but step too far out of the expected pattern, and suddenly your herbs are unnatural, and your candles are whispering. You remember when your cousin got into trouble for drawing protective symbols on his door using chicken fat and ash. He claimed it was a dream-inspired defense against bean thieves. It didn't help that a local boy had gone missing with a full sack of legumes. Coincidence? Maybe. But the reeve made him scrub his door and sleep with a Bible on his chest for a week. No one mentions beans around him anymore. In the broader world, authorities take magic more seriously, or more theatrically. There are bishops who burn books, cities with official witch-finders, and regions where being left-handed is considered mildly suspicious. You read once that a man in Bohemia was arrested for owning a book that made odd squeaking sounds when opened. It turned out to be a poorly bound copy of Psalms, but by then, his reputation was toast. And yet, people still believe. You do. Your neighbors do. Even the reeve, with his puffed-up declarations and wobbly whistle, keeps a dried frog in his boot for back pain and general luck. No one says anything, but we all notice when he limps more after forgetting to wear it. The social rules of magic are delicate. It's not about what you do. It's about how visible you are while doing it. If your charms are small, domestic, and scented like rosemary, they're grandmotherly. If they involve bones, blood, or anything drawn in a circle, you might find yourself explaining things to Father Bernard while he side-eyes your broom collection. You sweep your floor that evening with exaggerated normalcy. Nothing suspicious, just a person sweeping like any good villager. You mutter a little rhyme under your breath. Not magical, of course, just rhythmic. Helps the wrist motion, purely ergonomic. Outside, the sun dips low, and the shadows stretch like lazy cats. Someone lights a candle too early and gets scolded. A group of children dare each other to touch the elm tree. The cooper's wife walks home, head held high, clutching a very normal loaf of bread. You watch her go and think, she'll be fine. Probably. Unless the clay figure actually was magical. In which case, you really hope it wasn't aimed at the sourdough. The air feels unusually crisp this morning, too crisp. That special kind of stillness that settles before something strange happens. Like a goat giving birth to twins with matching birthmarks, or a bucket of milk souring before sunrise. You toss on your cloak and step outside, eyes adjusting to the strange glow hovering over the village. No storm clouds, no fog. Just an eerie golden shimmer that feels like someone dusted the whole world with curiosity. The shimmer has a source, of course, the manor. The local lord, in his infinite need to be just a little more mysterious than necessary, has hired a foreign alchemist. That's right, not a healer, not a monk. A man in a pointed hat who owns at least 5 rings and seems to think fire is a reasonable tool for everything from cooking to courtship. You, being you, make your way to the manor gates, not to snoop, obviously, but just to admire the glow. It's very glowy, and you're not alone. Half the village is pretending to casually pass by, all of them staring too long, squinting too hard, and whispering too loudly to be inconspicuous. And then the door opens. The alchemist steps out in layered robes the color of mustard and old wine. His beard is alarmingly symmetrical. He carries a leather-bound notebook, a small bottle of something fizzing ominously, and the undeniable air of someone who thinks they're the smartest in the room, especially if the room contains livestock. Historians still argue whether medieval alchemists were closer to scientists, philosophers, or dangerous pyromaniacs with access to too much mercury. This one? He seems like all 3. He gestures for quiet, then explains, at length, that he's attempting transmutation, specifically turning base metals into gold, naturally. He waves a brass coin dramatically. Soon, this shall be sunlight, solidified. The villagers ooh appreciatively, though several quietly check their pockets to make sure their coins aren't already changing. The Lord, standing nearby with the same nervous smile he wears during thunderstorms and harvest festivals, seems mostly on board. Probably because the alchemist also promised him a potion for baldness and a formula to keep horses from sneezing. Back in your own humble cottage, you marvel at the idea of turning lead into gold. Not because it seems likely, but because you've never seen someone talk so confidently while holding a beaker that appears to be gently smoking. Alchemy, in contrast to your usual charm-based folk magic, is flashy. It has symbols, Latin phrases, glass tubes, and a deep commitment to never explaining things in plain language. The alchemist writes in code, not metaphorical code, literal encrypted script full of squiggles, moon signs, and what might be musical notation. And yet, there's a kind of reverence around it. The villagers treat him with a wary respect. They don't exactly trust him, but they understand he's important. Dangerous maybe, but fascinating. Like a bear in a feathered hat. You recall stories of other noblemen who kept alchemists. Some claim to have bottled moonlight, cured death briefly, or discovered potions that made you invisible to taxes. Most died broke, poisoned, or slightly glowing. Still, the reputation of alchemists as wise men, sages perched between worlds, lingers. You even tried alchemy once. Not full gold making, of course. But you did attempt to transmute porridge into something edible using heat, time, and crushed plum pits. The result was emotional. You ended up with a sticky mass that vibrated slightly when left unattended. Still, there's something magnetic about it. The idea that secrets of the universe lie just out of reach, and that maybe, just maybe, with the right words, symbols, and dried lizard tail, you could unlock them. You remember a phrase the alchemist shouted earlier, as above, so below. A popular saying among his type. It means more or less that the small things mirror the large, that the movements of stars influence the flow of rivers, and the balance of elements governs everything from the cosmos to your stew pot. That stew pot, by the way, is now bubbling a little too energetically. You double-check the herbs. Nothing too experimental. Just the usual. Onion, thyme, and a pinch of sage. You whisper a calming verse because honestly, it looks like it's plotting something. Later that evening, a crowd gathers again at the manor. The alchemist is unveiling something called the philosopher's vapor. It smells like regret and glows faintly pink. He dips a coin into it. Nothing happens. He nods sagely and says, "It's still working." You exchange glances with Marjorie. "It's gold on the inside," she murmurs. "Maybe it's shy," you whisper back. The crowd disperses slowly. No one quite disappointed, because no one really expected gold. What they came for was possibility. That strange shimmer in the air. That hint of a world where lead can become light. Where the right mixture of salt and prayer might change everything. Historians suggest that medieval alchemy was less about science and more about transformation of the self. You may not understand distillation, but you do understand longing for change, for betterment, for control in a chaotic world. And so, you return home, your mind buzzing with symbols and strange Latin words. You light a candle, place your most coppery-looking spoon on the table, and stare at it very hard. Just in case. Because tonight, the air still glows a little. You wake the next morning with sore eyes and the distinct impression that staring at a spoon for 3 hours does not, in fact, turn it into gold. It does, however, make you deeply reflect on the dust gathering behind it. You make a mental note to sweep later, or never. Today, the village is abuzz with a very different kind of magic. The kind that's officially sanctioned. Miracles. You shuffle to the well, filling your bucket as the gossip begins flowing even faster than the water. A traveling merchant passed through last night and claimed that 2 villages over, a woman touched a saint's sandal and her eyesight returned. You nearly drop your bucket. Not because you're surprised, but because this happens all the time. In the medieval mind, if God wants to fix your joints or make your bread rise again, in more ways than one, He'll do it through the proper channels. Saints mostly. Their bones, cloaks, hair, fingernails. Even a spoon they once used or a page they sneezed on. These relics carry power, not because they glow or levitate, but because people believe they do. And the church? It's very selective about what counts as a miracle versus what counts as unacceptable magical nonsense. Historians still argue whether this distinction was doctrinal or just really good marketing. Because let's be honest, if you heal a sick cow using garlic and muttering, it's magic. But if you heal it by touching a piece of St. Barbara's eyebrow, that's divine intervention and very respectable. Father Bernard has his own small collection of relics. He doesn't show them off, but you've caught glimpses. A sliver of wood said to be from the true cross. A strip of linen supposedly once touched by Saint Dymphna. And the prized possession, a silver bell that rings even when no one touches it, occasionally, possibly from drafts. You once saw him ring it over a batch of spoiled wine. It didn't unspoil, but it smelled holier afterward. Your village even has its own local miracle, sort of. Years ago, a carved statue of the Virgin was said to weep during a drought. Just a single tear, right before the rain started. A traveling friar later suggested it might have been condensation. But no one invited him back, and he mysteriously left with a beat in his boot. You still pray at that statue when your joints ache. It hasn't wept since. But your knees seem less judgmental afterward. You think about the saints themselves. Many lived odd, painful lives, fasting, bleeding, floating, or talking to birds. They seem almost like magical folk heroes, just with church-approved resumes. Saint Cuthbert once calmed a storm with his cloak. Saint Bridget made beer out of water. Saint Wilgefortis, yes, the bearded lady saint, was said to have grown facial hair to avoid marriage. You admire the commitment. People wear medallions with saints' images. They sew prayers into their sleeves. Your neighbor even embroidered a tiny Saint Christopher onto his dog's collar so he'd be protected while chasing geese. The dog still chases geese, but now he does it safely. There's a fine line between miracle and magic. The priest might bless a field to encourage a good harvest. You, meanwhile, bury an old shoe and whistle while planting beans. Different methods, same goal. And really, who's to say which is more effective? At least your method doesn't require Latin. That afternoon, a group of pilgrims passes through the village. Dusty, tired, but glowing with the sort of hope only people walking 300 miles for a toenail can manage. They've come to see a relic in a nearby town. A vial of blood from a martyred saint that's said to bubble during feast days. You offer them bread and listen politely as they recount their travels. One of them swears his limp ease just stepping near the reliquary. Another tells you that the holy scent of roses surrounded them in a town where no flowers grow. You don't doubt them. Not really. The power of belief here is as thick as wool, and just as warm. You ask cautiously what they think about charms. The kind you wear. The kind made of herbs and whispers. The older pilgrim leans in and says with a wink, "If it keeps the devil out, and it doesn't require goat bones, I say use it." Everyone chuckles and you tuck that little loophole away for later. That evening, you light a candle beneath your own modest household relic. A shard of pottery your great-aunt swore came from a pilgrim's bowl touched by St. Agnes. Is it true? Who knows? But it fits perfectly in your palm and gives off a comfortable warmth. Not literally, but emotionally. And that's enough. Historians note that the Church sometimes tried to rein in local saints, especially the unofficial ones. People love to canonize their own. A shepherd who whistled too well. A healer whose feet never got dirty. A woman who sang birds out of trees. But officially, Rome wanted paperwork, miracles with witnesses, and a proper martyred ending. Bureaucracy, even in the realm of the divine. But in your village, if someone helps the sick, keeps away storms, or makes a rooster stop crowing at midnight, that's good enough. Saint or not, they get a place in your prayers. You fall asleep that night with the pottery shard on your shelf, the bell faintly tinkling from the church, and the scent of frankincense wafting in from someone's overly enthusiastic evening blessing. You're safe. You're blessed. You've got garlic by the door and a saint in your heart. And just maybe, a little miracle tucked under your pillow. The next day dawns with a damp chill that seeps into your socks before you've even left your bed. You groan, stretch, and squint at the ceiling, half expecting to see a spider tracing runes above your head. No spider, just a thatch leak shaped like a pig. Comforting in its own way. You shuffle to the hearth and light a small fire, then reach up to the mantel for one of your most prized possessions. A pouch of protective socks. Not just any socks. These are knitted from wool, spun during a thunderstorm, dyed with walnut husk, and, according to your grandmother, blessed by a man who sneezed during Mass. You don't argue with the logic. They work, or at least they've never failed. Which is close enough. The socks go on, and you feel the faint hum of invincibility. Today, you're going to visit the relic market. Now, to be clear, this isn't a market for relics in the official church-approved sense. It's more like a magical flea market mixed with an old drawer of someone's hopeful junk. Still, everyone in the region knows that if you want a lucky charm, a healing scrap, or something to stop your uncle's leg from vibrating during thunderstorms, this is where you go. You walk the winding path past 3 chickens who give you the side eye and 1 duck who refuses to move. Typical gatekeeper behavior. At the edge of a nearby village, the market is already bustling. It smells of wax, herbs, roasted nuts, and faint desperation. Stalls are crammed with pendants, wood carvings, pressed flowers in resin, and jars of water with suspicious floating things. You pass a woman selling Saint-Kist salt and another hawking hunger stones, pebbles you hold when fasting to make you feel full. You buy one, mostly because it's shiny and has a tiny painted smile. You pause at a table with small cloth bundles, each labeled with promises. For courage, for forgiveness, for winning at dice. You consider that last one. The local dice game is brutally rigged. Next stall down, a man with very few teeth offers you a holy toenail. You raise an eyebrow. He insists it once belonged to a monk who never blinked. Not once, he whispers, tapping the glass vial. Whole life, eyes wide open, knew everything. You don't buy it, but you do stare at it for a while, just in case. Historians are torn about these objects. Were they folk faith, commerce, performance art, all 3? Many relics were clearly fake, fingernails carved from bone, hair that looked suspiciously like goat, but that never seemed to matter. What mattered was the story. You pass a trio of children gathered around a woman holding a candle stub. It's St. Martha's last candle, she tells them. She blew it out, and her fever left with the smoke. The kids gasp. One tries to touch it, and she slaps his hand away with a swiftness that suggests real belief. Further down the row, a man sells bread that's been walked near the shrine of St. Hubert. It's just slightly holier than regular bread. You buy a piece and eat it with exaggerated reverence. It tastes like rye and marketing. Still, your stomach feels good. You think about the relics people keep at home. Your cousin has a bottle of water blessed during a thunderstorm. Your neighbor has a wooden comb said to have belonged to a hermit who could talk to deer. You even heard about a woman who swears by a sheep's tooth that rattles whenever someone nearby is lying. It rattled constantly during her last marriage. She's remarried. The tooth is quiet now. Relics don't just come in obvious forms. Some are found, like the rock, shaped like a fishtail you keep on your window ledge. Or made, like the charm stitched into your apron, that's mostly thread and good intentions. Others are inherited, passed down through generations, with no explanation except, don't lose this, or we all die. You once dropped it under the floorboards, spent an hour muttering apologies while dangling upside down with a broomstick. The house didn't collapse, so you figure it worked. As you walk home with a satchel full of small nonsense and great meaning, you reflect on what these relics really do. They don't glow, they don't float, but they remind. They say, you're protected, you're connected. Someone else believed in this, and now you do too. And belief, in a world full of plagues, storms, and slightly smug ducks, is a kind of magic all its own. Back in your cottage, you hang your newest charm, a tiny wooden fish with a pebble in its mouth, above the door. For abundance, the seller claimed. You're not sure what kind. You just hope it's not mice. You pull off your socks, warm and slightly enchanted, and place them beside your pillow. Nearby, your bowl of holy salt sparkles faintly. The hunger stone rests in your palm, smooth and cool. You feel protected, or at least slightly more interesting. And sometimes, that's enough. It begins with a cow falling over. That's how a lot of things start around here. Either a cow, a cart, or a cousin doing something ill-advised with mushrooms. But this time, it's the village's prized milk cow, Beatrice, who topples sideways during milking, legs stiff as old broom handles, and eyes rolling like marbles in soup. The farmer panics. His wife screams. A child starts sobbing, not for the cow, but for the future lack of butter. You arrive just in time to witness the priest arriving, wide-eyed and clutching his travel Bible like a shield. Someone whispers, "It's the devil." That's the sentence that changes everything. Not, "Maybe it was a bad carrot," or "Did anyone check for fleas?" No, once that word is uttered, logic politely leaves the room and is replaced by heavy incense, nervous glances, and a lot of sudden praying. The cow doesn't recover immediately, which is suspicious. A charm is tied around her neck. The farmer lights a blessed candle and mutters a verse that doesn't rhyme but feels powerful. The priest dabs her brow, well, her forehead adjacent area, with holy water. When the cow twitches, someone gasps. When she snorts, a woman faints. And when Beatrice eventually stands up, wobbly but alive, the entire village draws the same conclusion. The devil was there, but they chased him off. Historians still argue whether these episodes were genuine cases of belief or cleverly rehearsed village theater. But in your world, they are part of the rhythm. Misfortune rarely happens without cause. And if no earthly explanation fits, well, there's always the other one. You see, the devil gets blamed for quite a lot. Spoiled butter? Devil. Falling roof tile? Devil. Sudden case of hiccups that only stops when you say amen 3 times while spinning? Absolutely diabolical. This isn't to say people see the devil everywhere, but they do believe he visits, slips through the cracks, dances in the shadows, and tests the faithful by hiding your shoes or giving your pig a slightly superior attitude. There's a whole lexicon for this. The evil eye is a favorite culprit, an invisible curse, often blamed on that one neighbor with piercing eyes and too many cats. You once caught yourself muttering a counterspell after she complimented your roof. It seemed fine, but 3 days later, your thatch leaked in the shape of a lizard. You slept with garlic under your pillow for a week. Many villagers wear amulets to keep demonic forces at bay. Iron rings, twisted nails, small bones wrapped in cloth. Father Bernard wears a pendant shaped like a sword. Symbolic, yes, but you've seen him tap it 3 times before stepping into the cemetery, just in case. And then there's blame migration. When someone suffers misfortune, people begin listing who they might have offended. Was it the blacksmith you shortchanged last week? The midwife whose herbal remedies you didn't finish? Or maybe it was something darker, something lurking near the woods, watching, waiting for someone to skip evening prayer or insult the soup. You remember the story of old Jonas, who tripped down the well stairs and broke 2 ribs. The official reason was slippery moss. The real reason, according to the baker, was that he had mocked a traveling friar's nose 2 days prior. The devil always defends the friars, she said, entirely serious, especially the squishy-faced ones. There's a particular kind of comfort in assigning blame to the devil. It removes the chaos. It says, this terrible thing happened not because the world is unpredictable, but because something targeted you. And if it targeted you, that means you can fight back. With prayer, with charms, with rituals passed down from relatives who refuse to explain themselves. You once overheard a woman cure her child's fever by waving a broom over the bed and muttering, "Out you go, tail and all." The fever broke the next day. You don't know if it was the herbs or the ritual, but now everyone sweeps their sick beds before making broth, just in case. And sometimes it's not about defense, it's about explanation. The traveling mason whose voice changed after being struck by lightning? Possession. The old shepherd who began barking at sheep instead of herding them? Cursed. The crop that sprouted in the shape of a pentagram? No one talks about that. The field is still considered temperamental. Even animals get blamed. Cats are obvious, especially black ones. Goats are suspicious. You've heard of chickens laying backwards eggs, which you assume means something, though no one's ever confirmed whether they hatch in reverse or just come out moody. You once saw a toad tied to a windowsill with a ribbon. To keep devils from climbing through, the homeowner explained. They hate amphibians. You didn't argue, and yet, for all the finger-pointing and holy water flinging, life goes on. The cow is still alive. The butter gets churned. The devil retreats, or perhaps gets bored and moves on to a different village where the peasants haven't recently buried a horseshoe under every corner of the barn. You return home that evening and scatter a pinch of salt across the doorway. Not because anything feels wrong, but because it's Thursday, and you once read that Thursdays are attractive to mischief. You hang a sprig of rowan above the hearth and toss a clove of garlic into the stew. Your cousin might call it seasoning. You call it spiritual security. As the fire crackles and the shadows stretch, you hum a little protection chant your mother taught you. It has no real tune, just rhythm and comfort. The cat blinks at you approvingly. Probably. Or maybe it's judging your garlic usage. Either way, you feel safer. And in the quiet of your cottage, far from cows, curses, and creeping calamities, you smile. Because if the devil was here today, well, he left hungry. Today begins with shouting. Not angry shouting, but the breathless kind. Equal parts excitement, panic, and a touch of gossip-flavored dread. You poke your head out the window and immediately see what the fuss is about. 2 village boys dragging a stool toward the stream, followed closely by half the village, and 1 very confused goose. You sigh. Someone's been accused of witchcraft again. Not dramatic, cackling in the moonlight witchcraft, but the quieter, far more inconvenient sort. This time, it's poor Ellen, the weaver's niece, who made the fatal mistake of curing a rash too quickly and speaking Latin backward in her sleep. You throw on your cloak and follow the procession. Not because you're eager to see justice served, but because you know that once the stool comes out, logic is off duty. Ah, the ducking stool. The medieval justice system's answer to how wet can we get someone while pretending it's legal arbitration. A simple wooden chair fixed to a long beam, balanced over a cold, judgmental river. The principle is clear. If the accused floats, they are probably a witch. If they sink, they are innocent, and quite possibly drowned. Historians still argue whether these trials were meant to produce truth or just catharsis. Either way, they are rarely boring. Ellen sits on the stool, looking equal parts furious and resigned. Her aunt is shouting at the reeve. The reeve is shouting at the goose, who has claimed the ducking area as its personal sunning spot. Father Bernard arrives, holding a soggy prayer book and muttering about mob energy and insufficient breakfast. The stool creaks ominously as it's pushed over the stream. Ellen is asked to confess. She says nothing. Someone shouts, "She turned my hair green." Ellen, whose hair is undeniably the color of average mud, rolls her eyes so hard you hear it. The boys tip the stool. Splash. Ellen goes under. The crowd murmurs. 10 seconds pass. 15. Then up she pops, coughing and swearing in perfectly normal forward Latin. You'd think this would clear things up, but no. She used the water to boost her spell, someone cries. She's just mad because her pig won't look at her, mutters someone else. Ellen is pulled from the water, dripping and exasperated. The reeve shrugs and declares the matter unresolved. Father Bernard offers her a towel. The goose bites him. You wander home, damp just from watching, thinking again about how accusations work around here. It doesn't take much. A missed mass, a suspicious mole, knowing the wrong kind of herb, being too good at gardening. Once, a woman was accused of summoning rain because she sneezed during a drought, and it thundered 5 hours later. In fairness, that was weird. But usually, accusations follow misfortune. A bad harvest, a sick child, a love triangle that has become a square. And when reason fails, or when people need someone to blame, suddenly, everything magical becomes dangerous. You remember when your uncle was accused of hexing a well because he sneezed into it while drinking. He had to sleep next to a barrel of blessed sand for a week to prove his innocence. The sand didn't help his allergies. There's a pattern. It's not the spell, it's the visibility. Quiet magic, charms, whispered blessings, herbs tucked under pillows, those are fine. Adorable even. But too much success, too quickly, too publicly. That's suspicious. And if you're a woman, even more so. Historians often point out how witch trials disproportionately targeted older women, midwives, and the poor. Women who were inconvenient, outspoken, or, heaven forbid, unmarried past 30. Your village is no exception. You pass old Agatha's cottage on your way back. She's lived alone for decades, has 3 cats, and bakes bread that smells unsettlingly of mint and secrets. Everyone agrees she's probably magical, but no one bothers her. Not because they're scared, because she once cured the reeve's rash, and he now delivers her eggs personally. That's politics. The church tries to regulate this with official channels. Bishops occasionally send edicts warning against the sinful temptation of female conjuration. But they also bless charms against hail, so the message gets a bit muddled. Back home, you sit by the fire and re-examine your own collection of slightly suspicious items. a dried lizard foot for luck, a carved moonstone for dreams, and a button you found under mysterious circumstances. Just feels important. None of it's dangerous, not unless you get too good at something. That's the danger really, not magic, but attention. You stir your stew clockwise, always clockwise, and throw in a pinch of thyme. You hum softly, not a spell exactly, but something rhythmic. Something your grandmother said helps flavor seep all the way into the beans. Your cat watches with one eye, judging, or perhaps warding off evil. Hard to say. Later that evening, you hear laughter outside. Ellen has dried off and is making jokes at her own expense, waving a stick like a wand and cackling dramatically. The children adore it. The parents pretend not to. The reeve ducks into a house, avoiding her eye. The goose has vanished, likely plotting. No one truly believes Ellen is dangerous. Not really, but for a moment, the village needed a drama, a focus, a reason for the sour bread, the lost keys, the slightly weird wind that knocked over someone's laundry line. And now that it's past, everything will go back to normal. Until next time, because in your world, a witch is never really discovered. She's conjured by fear, gossip, and a collective shrug. You smile, wrap your charm cord 3 times around your wrist, and whisper your evening verse. Not because you're afraid someone will accuse you next, just because you like to be prepared. You wake before dawn, not from a dream or rooster alarm, but from the feeling that your bookshelf has shifted, which is strange because you don't own a bookshelf. What you do have is a rickety corner table piled with odd books, scrolls, charms, and one very persistent spider. This morning, it feels different. You light a candle and approach it cautiously, half expecting the spider to speak Latin or offer you a riddle. Instead, your eye catches a familiar volume. Its leather cover cracked, its pages brittle and stained with what might be elderberry juice or something far less explainable. The title, etched in a once gilded scroll, reads, "The Mirror of Light and Root." You didn't buy this book. You inherited it from your aunt, who received it from a passing minstrel, who claimed he won it in a dice game from a man with no shadow. You know better than to question that chain of custody. You crack it open slowly, expecting the usual. Herbal cures, protective verses, maybe a bad drawing of a goat. But this morning, the ink seems to shimmer. Not glow, exactly, but ripple, like it knows you're watching. You shut it very firmly and put a heavy mug on top of it. Books have power. In the medieval world, where literacy is rare and parchment expensive, any book that isn't a Bible, a saint's life, or a tax ledger is already a little suspect. Add in strange symbols, marginalia written sideways, or illustrations involving snakes in robes, and people start whispering. You once heard a tale of a book bound in mooncalf skin that screamed when opened. More likely it just had a musical hinge, but the rumor was enough to get the prior who owned it relocated for contemplation. You check your own collection again. 3 normal books, saints' tales, a collection of riddles, and a guide to identifying edible moss, and 1 grimoire. Well, it's not labeled as such. But when you found a bookmark made of crow feather and someone else's fingernail, you made your peace with its true nature. You remember when your cousin tried to read from it aloud. She got to the 2nd sentence before the wind blew open every shutter in the house. She's still nervous around door hinges. Historians still argue whether grimoires were widespread or simply rare artifacts used by the scholarly elite. You suspect the truth is somewhere in between. There's the polished kind, written by monks with great penmanship and impeccable candlelight. And then there's the real kind, handwritten, patched together, dog-eared, and often sticky. Yours is the second type. Some people claim to own books that talk. Not conversationally, more like murmurs, sighs, or pages that turn themselves when the moon hits just right. You've never caught yours doing that, but sometimes you swear it smells like cloves when it shouldn't. You head to the village square later that morning, passing by Marjorie's hut. She's sitting cross-legged, copying something onto scraps of bark. Healing chants, she explains. I ran out of parchment. You nod, approving of her practicality. She winks. Bark holds magic better anyway. Doesn't ask questions. The topic of forbidden texts is always murky. The church condemns necromantic manuscripts, spell books that summon demons, and anything that claims to predict the future in ways not explicitly approved by God. But the line is blurry. A charm to ward off coughs? Acceptable. A charm to win a court case? Risky. A charm that involves owl blood and reciting the alphabet backwards? You're on thin ice, alphabetically and theologically. You think of Brother Matthias, the village's one-time scribe, who once tried to catalogue all known magical recipes. He made it to page 23 before mysteriously forgetting how to write the letter R. His work was quietly removed. His soup has since been under-seasoned. You visit the church for confession, partly out of spiritual duty, partly to see whether Father Bernard's new reading glasses have changed his views on certain suspicious texts. He greets you warmly, then asks, too casually, whether you've read anything unsettling lately. You respond, equally casually, only the tax records. He looks disappointed. On your way out, you pass a traveling bookseller whose cart is filled with tomes titled The Wind's Folly, Charm Against Barn Collapse, and Dream Interpretations of Animals That Don't Exist. You buy the last one, for research, and because you had a dream about a rabbit with antlers just last week. The book says that means unexpected visitors. You hope they bring bread. Back home, you finally lift the mug off the mirror of light and root. You open to a random page. No shimmering ink this time. Just a passage about onion spirits and a recipe for egg unbreaking, which you assume refers to metaphorical eggs, or else someone was very optimistic. You copy the recipe onto a slip of bark and tuck it near your cooking corner, just in case. And maybe, just maybe, you'll read another page tomorrow. Not because you're curious, but because a book that's waited this long deserves a little attention. The last leaves of the season drift from the trees like half-hearted confetti, and the wind carries a faint smell of cider, smoke, and change. You step outside, wool cloak tight around your shoulders, and notice the charms on your door frame have begun to fade. The ribbon has unraveled. The knot of garlic has lost its bite. The carved wooden eye your aunt gave you is now more of a wooden squint. It's time to update your protections. Not because you're frightened, but because habits are hard to shake. And in your village, belief lingers like the scent of rosemary on a baking tray. You make your rounds. Check the iron nail hammered into the threshold. Replace the sprig of rue hanging in the window. Whisper the words you were taught, not exactly prayers, not exactly spells, just a kind of careful talking. You speak them softly, more to the wind than to anyone else. It listens, as always. In many ways, Your life hasn't changed much in the years you've lived it, but you've seen others shift. The new priest speaks less of devils, more of discipline. A passing noble dismissed the old healing chants as backward traditions, even as he clutched a charm hidden in his silk sleeve. You've heard whispers that in the cities, people laugh at charms, burn their old books, and call belief peasant nonsense. And yet, in those same cities, people still hang sprigs of mint in doorways. Mothers still tie ribbons around their children's wrists. Travelers still touch their fingers to stone saints and ask for safe passage. Magic, it seems, doesn't vanish. It just changes costumes. Historians today debate whether belief in magic ever truly died out. Certainly, by the end of the Middle Ages, people spoke less openly about charms. Laws became stricter. Witch hunting manuals were published in thick, unpleasant Latin. Magic became dangerous to claim, but it never stopped being practiced. Even now, there's an old woman 2 fields over who speaks to bees before harvesting honey. A boy who collects owl feathers and buries them during storms. Your own cousin carries 3 lucky pebbles. 1 for love, 1 for health, 1 for not falling in wells. It's not called magic anymore, not out loud, but it lives. You wander through the village as twilight arrives, watching neighbors light candles, lock doors with deliberate motions, and glance upward at the sky. Not just for weather, but for signs. A bird flying against the wind. A single star too early. A shape in the clouds that resembles a fish with opinions. You think back to everything you've carried, charms, stories, herbs, dreams, and everything your ancestors carried before you. They didn't always agree on what was real, but they acted as if it was. And so do you. You reach your door, just as the first breeze of night rustles the thatch. The wood creaks familiarly beneath your hand. Inside, your home waits. The hearth is warm. The cat is smug. The old book you still haven't finished sits where you left it, patiently unread. Above the doorframe, you hang a new charm. Rowan, red thread, and a tooth-shaped pebble that looks vaguely like it's smiling. You don't know if it works. You only know that it feels right. You sit by the fire and sip a mug of cider laced with cinnamon and possibly a few forgotten intentions. Outside, the wind carries the faint sounds of someone singing an old charm, half lullaby, half word. Inside, the candlelight dances gently on the walls, and you smile, knowing that magic, in all its forms, faith, tradition, fear, comfort, has never really left. It just settled in your cupboard and learned to hum while you sleep. The fire has softened now, curling low and golden in the hearth, casting lazy shadows that stretch and shrink like slow breath. The air is still. Even the floorboards have stopped creaking, and the wind at your window whispers not warnings, but gentle hushes, like a lullaby written in branches and breeze. You rest deeper into your blanket, the familiar textures around you blending into a gentle blur of warmth and memory. The crackle of the coals, the faint ticking of some imagined clock, the distant murmur of someone humming a tune no one remembers learning. There's nothing left to do tonight. No charms to renew, no herbs to sort, no dreams to interpret or suspicious mushrooms to prod. Just rest. Just this quiet space where magic doesn't demand belief, but offers a soft place to settle into. Let your mind drift now, slowly, gently. Let the images fade, the forest paths, the candlelight in church, the book that shimmered and didn't. Let them all become the steady rhythm of breath, the calm glow behind closed eyes, the quiet pulse of a world at peace. For now, you're safe here. The door is locked. The night spirits are respectfully distant. Even the goose has gone to bed. Let yourself follow. Sleep now, dear one. Tomorrow, the world will still be strange. The stories will still be half true and fully comforting. But for now, there's nothing more to know. Only warmth, only rest, only the quiet magic of nightfall and a soft voice saying, "You've made it to the end. Sweet dreams."